Hi, this is Aldo Gandia with a quick message to let you know that if you want to listen to some of our shows live, all you need to do is go to Mixlr.com. That's MIXLR.com. Register, it's totally free, and you will receive email updates whenever we have a live show. We'd love for you to stop by and interact in the chat room with fellow sports fans, movie lovers, and just have a good old time. Mixlr.com. The following program is suitable for all ages.
Buffone. A certain magic will always linger with the very name. It speaks of courage and fervor in the world's most brutal game. 55, worn by Doug Buffone, a Chicago Bear through and through. He demanded excellence of himself and anyone wearing navy blue.
You tell me what's going on. This is moronic. We're going to get our whipped all the way down the line. I want somebody to get kicked in the and get out there and play. You're getting paid to play this game. I'm playing right. I don't mind you getting beat. I got my whipped many times. But I tell you, I took somebody down with me. You are a professional team. Act like one, for God's sakes.
Football fans, this is Buffone 55, the John Buffone Show.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Buffone 55, a fast-paced approach to Chicago Bears football analysis. Welcome, Barflies, Bear fans, and Viking fans if you're out there. We appreciate you tuning in. I am your host, John Buffone. I'm coming to you live Tuesday night, September 24th, over our Mixlr.com channel. Every week, we take an intense look at the Chicago Bears and provide in-depth analysis of their upcoming opponent. Here to help break down the Minnesota Vikings this week is Arif Hasan, writer for The Athletic. He's going to join us in just a little bit, but first, I want to welcome my producer and moderator, Alyssa Barbieri. Alyssa, how you doing?
I'm doing good after that win last night. That's a great way to start the week off.
Oh, man, I'm pretty juiced up. I'm pretty excited about that. It was a good win. It's the team you should beat. They did beat, and they did it in a pretty dominant fashion. There were some hiccups, but it was a good performance.
Absolutely. So, John, we're going to kick things off. I'm going to let us know how we're going to begin. We begin and end the show with 5 questions that you have 55 seconds to respond to. That's John's way of dedicating Buffone 55 to Doug Buffone, his uncle who played 15 seasons for the Chicago Bears and wore, what else, number 55. So, John, let's get the first 5 in the books, and then we'll bring in Arif.
All right.
So, Mitch Trubisky was 25 for 31 for 231 yards and 3 touchdowns. What was the most impressive part of that performance Monday night? 55 seconds are on the clock. Go.
First and foremost, I think Nagy did a better job at scheming this week, played to some of Mitch's strengths. Obviously, Trubisky incrementally improved his grasp on the game. Once he settled in, he made some nice plays. The long bomb touchdown to Gabriel was a beautiful throw. Go back and watch that over again and see if that ball could have been placed any better given the circumstances. Now, people are probably tired of hearing this from me because I say it every week, but in this league, you're either getting better or you're getting worse, and Mitch took a little step forward Monday night. It did look like he was seeing the field a little bit better, which is going to be huge for his development. One read Mitch isn't going to get it done. He completed passes to 9 different receivers, 5 of which had multiple receptions. So he just seemed a little more efficient, and they did have some longer sustaining drives, which I said was going to be crucial for a number of reasons. Obviously scoring points, but also playing the field position game and giving a world-class defense a little bit of a breather, which I believe cuts down on the risk of injuries. Overall, this was impressive because he didn't fall apart on national TV like some were expecting. This kid's getting put through the ringer right now, and it would have been easy to clam up, and he helped the Bears.
And it's nice to see that Trubisky's actually, he keeps making small incremental progress. I know he's in his 3rd season, but it's nice to see that he finally got a rhythm. It's encouraging, especially that throw. Not many quarterbacks can make that throw, so that was special.
It would have been a hell of a lot worse if he fell apart on Monday night against the Redskins.
Absolutely. So on the flip side, what was the most concerning part of Trubisky's performance? The clock is running.
Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to dump on a quarterback that just won a game and showed improvements, but there were some bad parts last night. Even some of the balls that were completed were off target, and we saw Allen Robinson had to dive or make an awkward grab sometimes where the ball should have hit him in the chest. He's still missing open receivers at times. I think he looked a little shaky at points. The sack near the end zone. I know everyone is quick to jump on the offensive line, and rightfully so, but when you have guys crashing down on you and you're basically standing in your own end zone, toss the ball in the damn dirt to avoid the potential of a safety. Then the interception when they were about to score late in the game. That had the potential to be a deadly swing in points. That would have essentially been the nail in the coffin, and, all of a sudden, Washington has life. That fade was underthrown by probably 5 yards, if it was in fact a fade, but he almost hit the pylon with it. I'm concerned because the Bears were playing with short field thanks to the defense, and I still don't know if this would have got it done against the league's best. Would this have worked against the Rams? I don't know. So I still have a couple concerns.
I don't want to nitpick throws, but the interception in the red zone, it's the second red zone interception he's had this year, and you got to worry a little bit about those.
Yeah, you got to take care of the ball. You got to take care of the ball inside the 10 and the 20-yard line.
Absolutely. So sticking with the offense, the running game mounted 90 rushing yards on 24 carries with rookie David Montgomery, getting 13 of those rushes for 67 yards. Assess how play calling head coach Matt Nagy is utilizing the run game in this team's offense and the team's new running back. 55 ticks. Ready, set, go.
I liked how the Bears were able to drain the clock with the lead on their last drive. By the way, how about the ability of David Montgomery to constantly break tackles and fall 2 yards forward? He averaged over 5 yards per carry in this game. I really think this kid's going to be something special down the line. And sometimes you see this, a rookie running back kind of getting phased in, getting acclimated to the rigors of a 16-game NFL season. It's very possible that Montgomery could become a 20 to 25 carry back down the line, maybe sooner rather than later, because we saw a lot less Mike Davis last night. Kind of makes you wonder if this is going to be a trend. Cohen really isn't getting many touches either. Is this a loading process for David Montgomery to be on the field a lot more? Maybe we see Cohen in the slot a little bit more. Like I said before, I liked the game scheme this week a hell of a lot more than I liked in weeks 1 and 2. So it is possible that Nagy is starting to see through the weeds a little bit. He's putting together what he knows is going to work. And if the run game gets humming, that's just another thing that's going to help Trubisky get into his own rhythm. It's another thing that keeps the defense off the field, and it can help transform this offense from shaky to stable.
And do you think, would you say that David Montgomery solidified the fact that he is the number one running back on this team?
I think so, and I think that the Bears thought that he has been the entire time. Now, his usage has been a bit peculiar. I don't know if they thought that they were going to take it easy on him, kind of, ease him in. We see rookie running backs get thrown into the fire a lot, but we also sometimes see them get phased in. Maybe Nagy said, well, if we have Mike Davis, he can, take the brunt of it for a while. We have Tariq Cohen, who's been there before, so maybe this was just like an ease-in process, and now it's just like, okay, it's yours, take over.
Can't wait to see what he does against the Vikings, which we'll get to later in the show. So moving on, switching sides to the defense. So once again, the defense just played lights out, aside from that second half. They finished with 4 sacks, including 2 strip sacks by Khalil Mack. Clinton-Dix returned to Washington and had 2 picks, including 1 for a touchdown. In total, they had 5 takeaways. But after halftime, the defense did allow 266 yards. Take the next 55 seconds to grade the defense's overall performance and tell us why the grade. Go.
I thought the defense was spectacular. One thing that did cross my mind, could this have been any more of a Bears game that the defense created 5 turnovers and the fate of the game was still in flux in the fourth quarter? I mean, come on, man. But overall, it was another dominant performance. Clinton-Dix, for all the crazy bloviating done online by, experts, he did put himself in a position to pick off 2 passes and take 1 to the house. Khalil Mack is worth everything and more that the Bears gave to the Raiders. I'm sure Jay Gruden's going to be staring daggers into his brother John at Thanksgiving for making him deal with Khalil Mack last night. And when you have a dominant defense, some big names do go underrated. Danny Trevathan is a huge part of this defense, as we saw, but he doesn't grab the headlines. He's a vital part in the heart of this defense, and the same can be said for Akeem Hicks, who we hope is okay, Eddie Jackson, so on and so forth. But I will say things got a little soft in the second half, and I'm not sure why that was going on. It always makes me a little agitated when a defense is dominating a team, and then they just park the bus. Like, what has changed? Why allow a team to nickel and dime you to death when you've shown that you can bury them and pressure them all night? But overall, this defense sure as hell hasn't regressed.
And Khalil Mack just is not human. And it's going to be fun to see him against the Raiders in a couple weeks.
100%. And you know what? For all the people that say that, the Bears gave up too much, just watch the primetime games. All he does is create fumbles. And that's what I love about the guy. He's not worried about creaming the quarterback. He's worried about creating turnovers. I love that.
Absolutely. So here we go. Last question. Last year, the Bears averaged 6 penalties per game. Last night, there were a total of 9 against the Bears, and the team is now averaging 8.6 per game. What's going on with all the additional yellow laundry this season, and how concerning is it? You know the routine. Go.
I hate it, especially just like pregame penalty or pre-snap penalties. There's some bad offside calls last night. That's a discipline thing. I think everyone wants to get a good jump on the ball, but when you're costing your team 5 yards in a clip, that's no good. They've had 3 of those this year. That's the second most in the league. I think they've had 3 defensive holding calls and 3 defensive pass interference calls. But listen, we are only 19% through the regular season. There's time to fix that. This is not the time to start drawing absolute conclusions. But I'm not overly concerned on the defensive side of the ball. On the offensive side of the ball, the margin of error is a little slimmer. Up until last night, it felt like a false start call could be a drive killer. But they've had 5 offensive holding calls so far this year. I think only 1 false start. So honestly, the offense at times is efficient, but at least they're doing it honestly. They're not racking up the penalties. But penalties are a killer no matter the team. And if we're talking about this in week 9 and 10, then my concern level is going to swing a little bit. But we're still in a time where teams are figuring it out, and the penalties they're not killing the defense. So my concern level isn't sky high right now. That being said, I'd like to welcome in our guest tonight, Arif Hasan, a writer for The Athletic. Arif, thank you for being on Buffone 55. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing pretty well. I get a little winded after that segment, but we're gonna carry on, and we're gonna break down some Bears Vikings talk. Big division rivalry, big division game already, and only the 4th game of the season. Arif, I want to start with just kind of a general question. Every NFL team tries to find an identity, or they have an identity. Right now, what is the identity of the 2019 Vikings? It seems like they're going to a little more of a ground and pound kind of mentality.
Yeah, and I think they're going to run the ball for the rest of the season more than a lot of teams will. But I don't want to overemphasize how much they run the ball because, 2 of those games, they, boat raced out to a 21-0 lead by the second quarter. Of course, you're going to run the ball a lot. You take a look at a more competitive game or a game where they were behind with the Packers, they end up throwing the ball on I think 60% of their passes. So I wouldn't say that in a normal game situation that they're going to run the ball a ton. I still think they're going to run the ball more than other teams would in the same situation. And why wouldn't you? Dalvin Cook's averaging 6.6 yards a carry. But yeah, I would say that they want to develop their identity around running the ball. But also, I think the next step of that is to work off of that and build explosive passes out of play action, which is something that Kubiak's been known for in the past, and it's something that they've been working on this season.
Now, as Bears fans want to know, because the offense is still in question on the Chicago side of the ball, they want to know where the weakness is on the opponent's defense. Are there any weaknesses on this Minnesota Vikings defense, or what are the strengths that the Bears fans should be paying attention to that could be causing some problems? Right.
It is difficult to identify a weakness, I think, which is not to say that there aren't ways to attack this defense. Obviously, the Packers did that at the very beginning. But I would say that, it kind of depends on how Xavier Rhodes is playing that day. He played lights out against Julio Jones. He struggled against Devontae Adams. And, of course, he played well against the Raiders. I don't think anyone's taking too much away from that performance. So, how he's doing that day, whether or not he gets injured, that's going to be kind of a big question. The fact that Mackenzie Alexander's still injured and Mike Hughes is still kind of struggling to pick up a little bit of that defense. I think that the slot corner position and the slot receiver matchup is going to be kind of big for who's going to win. And then they're still trying to figure out what's happening at that defensive tackle spot. So if you can kind of design runs up to that B gap on the weak side, then, I'd expect David Montgomery to have a big day. I was a huge fan of him coming out. I'm glad to see that the Bears are using a lot more of him because he is a very talented back. So they've been good at stopping the run. Eric Hendricks is really great this year in terms of run stopping, but I wouldn't be surprised if that weakness kind of reveals itself going forward.
After Sunday's win against the Raiders, you posted a story at The Athletic with your takeaways from the game. I want to talk about some of those. First of all, you're right that the Vikings blitz is, quote, causing fear. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? As it seems like the Vikings under Zimmer haven't been blitzing as much, or has that kind of been a facade? Can you kind of break down that a little bit?
Yeah, so the Vikings show blitz a lot. They put a bunch of players up at the line of scrimmage, usually 7, sometimes even 9. players to the line of scrimmage, especially on 3rd and long. But they don't actually send more than 4 rushers all that often. In fact, this year it's been below league average. Most years it's around league average. They just don't blitz all that much compared to other teams, but it looks like they will be, or it looks like they are. And what that does to opponents is, A, it forces their routes to be shorter because, they need to get a hot route open, and that makes it more difficult to convert on those 3rd and longs. And then B, it puts teams into max protect, which the Raiders did a lot more of than I think most teams, but it keeps 7 players in pass protection, only sends 3 players out into routes. And because they're not actually sending that many pass rushers, that means they end up having 7 players to cover 3 players in routes. So they end up creating these mathematical advantages by essentially pretending to blitz, which when they do blitz, it usually tends to be pretty effective, but they don't actually blitz as much as a lot of people think they do.
Very interesting stuff. You kind of like that show blitz back off kind of thing. A lot of deception, which is proven to be rather effective. I'm switching back and forth on the sides of the ball. I want to go back to Dalvin Cook real quick. He set a team record as the first running back to earn 3 straight 100-yard games to start the season. There's talk that Cook now has elevated his play to the point where his name has to be included at the top of the league. Can you give us your thoughts on that and what makes him so effective? Well, tell us a little bit about his running style.
Sure. I wouldn't necessarily say Cook is a better running back than Alvin Kamara, but I would say that the way he's played these first 3 games certainly puts him in that discussion. I think Brian Westbrook said today that he does think Dalvin Cook is the best running back in the league, and he knows a thing or two about running backs. So, he's got the numbers to back him up. He's leading the league in yards per carry. He's 3rd in the league in yards after contact per carry. So there's a lot there to demonstrate that he can be at least the best pure runner, and he's not a bad pass catcher either. And the reason that he's so good at that, I think, is because he's got a great combination of decision-making and vision. Sometimes he knows that he can bounce the run outside, get an additional 7 or 8 yards, and sometimes he knows that even if those yards are there on the outside, it's more fruitful to take the 3-yard run on the inside because that's going to be better than risking a loss. So he has great decision-making, and he can use really small creases in the run game because I don't think the Vikings offensive line is actually run blocking all that spectacularly well, but those small creases appears, and he does a great job taking advantage of it. And I think the third thing that makes him so good is he doesn't run with a lot of power, but he still breaks a lot of tackles because he creates these awkward tackling angles for defenders, kind of, and this isn't a direct comparison, but kind of the same way Marshawn Lynch did by forcing defenders to attack at odd angles and ruining their kind of tackle balance, allowing those tacklers to slip off. So he's been doing a great job creating yards before contact and creating yards after contact to really kind of bring the game home for the Vikings.
We're talking to Arif Hasan, writer for The Athletic. I want to stick with the Vikings run game here. One of our scouts here at the Barroom, Shane Marsall, was really high on Alexander Madison, the running back the Vikings took in round 3 at 102. Sunday, Madison rushed for 12 times for 58 yards and his first career touchdown. What's his role in this Vikings offense? Seems like he's carving out a nice little role for himself.
Yeah, I think we initially anticipated that he would primarily be a goal line back. And the way the Vikings were talking about him at the beginning of the season and in the preseason was that they seemed to think this too, that they seemed to think that he'd primarily be a goal line running back, which I thought was a curious investment in the third round. But he's been better than that, both in the preseason and in the regular season. And so they've used him to kind of spell drives. They've used him to take the place of Dalvin Cook, especially after big runs, to start off other drives. And so he gets just a couple of carries here and there, regardless of the situation, because he can be a good kind of backup back. And that way they can keep Dalvin Cook fresh, especially important for somebody who's been injured the past couple of seasons.
I want to stick with the offense. I'm going to go with the aerial attack now. Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, last year, 2 of the top 11 wide receivers in receptions in the league. After 3 games this year, not so much. Do you expect that you're going to see a big spike in receptions from those two, or are we seeing kind of a changing of the guard, or at least a changing in mentality that's going to keep them out of that, top 10, top 11 rankings?
Yeah, well, I think if we're talking about total passing yardage or total receiving yardage, it'll be difficult for both of them to pass 1,000 like they did last year. But I do think that they will still continue to be focal point of the offense. Again, I don't think that the Vikings will continue to outpace their passing attempts with their carries. I think that by the end of the year, they'll end up having more passing attempts than rushing attempts. And if they don't, it's because they continue to generate big leads early in games. So, which I don't anticipate them doing with how much power that they have on offense. So I think that as time goes on, we'll see more targets for Dalvin Cook. We'll see more targets for Adam Thielen. Both of them look really great on film. They've done a really great job getting open, and even against really good defensive backs, they've made really good plays against like Jair Alexander, Kevin King, and so on. So on film, I think that they'll continue to be, top 15 receivers. Statistically, it'll be really difficult for them to get there. But I do think in individual games, either of them are liable to go off for 100 yards.
How about the guy throwing him the ball, Kirk Cousins, in the year 2 of that big guaranteed contract? He took a lot of heat last year for not making the playoffs, not being a guy that can win in the big game. What's the overall attitude towards Cousins this year, I guess internally, because we can kind of see what it is externally?
Right, yeah. Well, he's only had one significant test so far this year. Again, he's only had to manage some of those games. And so against the Packers, I think a lot of people were rightfully disappointed. And he displayed a shocking lack of situational awareness. And that was never one of his strengths to begin with. So the fact that he kind of fell below his own bar in terms of passing beyond the sticks, understanding the time on the clock, working 2-minute drills, so on and so forth. The fact that he fell below his normal bar was really concerning, because the next step for him is not to excel in standard down situations. He does pretty well there. It's to excel in those 3rd and long scenarios, 2-minute drill scenarios, and so on, to understand the context and the situation that he's throwing the ball in and making the right play with that in mind. And because he hasn't been able to do that, that I think is where the highlight and the focus is. And then again, of course, he's only had one good defense. Surprisingly, it's the Packers defense, who've been really remarkable this year. If he can elevate his game against another good defense, especially this week, I think that'll kind of change the narrative. I think we're kind of in a holding pattern or wait and see mode, even as we enter week 4, just because there just hasn't been that much to evaluate, given, how the game in Atlanta and how the game against Atlanta and how the game against Oakland played out.
We're talking to Arif Hasan, writer for The Athletic, breaking down the Minnesota Vikings, the Bears' next opponent. For years, the Vikings' offensive line seemed to be the team's Achilles heel, or at least it was not exactly a strong point. That seems to have been improved this year. Can you kind of profile the offensive line for us?
Yeah, well, part of it, I think, is that I'll say the offensive line has improved. I think that a lot of it is a little bit deceptive. I think part of it is that Dalvin Cook has made them look a lot better than they are. I think that the offseason acquisition of Josh Klein, really underrated. Hopefully he'll be able to play this week. He left late last game because of a concussion, but he's been really good, and I think he's actually been their best interior player despite a first-round pick investment at center. And then Riley Reiff has been average, which is fine. That's well above the standard of the Vikings offensive line overall. And then Brian O'Neill has been their best offensive lineman. But they have allowed a lot of pressure up the interior. That'll make for an interesting matchup if Akeem Hicks is still healthy enough to play this week. Regardless, Eddie Goldman's going to put up a big match, and Roy Robertson-Harris has been playing pretty well too. So we'll see kind of what happens with the interior offensive line there. But they've been protected by a lot of play action, especially in the preseason, but early kind of in the games too. And then Cousins hasn't had to drop back that much. When he has dropped back a lot, like in the game against Green Bay, he was under pressure on 60% of his snaps, which is obviously not ideal. So there's been up and downs, and I think the ups have been helped along with additional players in protection, the fact that they've been in play action, and so on. So we'll see if the offensive line is truly improved by a remarkable degree. It certainly has improved by at least a little bit, but that was kind of a low bar to clear anyway. And we'll see if they can continue to improve, because Garrett Bradbury has been struggling in pass protection. He had a good game against the Raiders, but they don't really have a ton of talent up front anyway. So we'll kind of see if his improvement is genuine.
Let's move over to the sidelines now. Mike Zimmer has a winning percentage of around 60% as head coach of the Vikings. That's 49-33-1. The team did exercise an option on his deal that's going to run through 2020. Is there any possibility that Zimmer's facing pressure from the organization that maybe his window's closing? Maybe it's a win now or else kind of situation, I guess.
Right. That's actually pretty difficult to determine. I know that the owners, the Wilfs, want to be kind of the next Rooneys or the next Maras, and they want to be stable at head coach. But obviously the flip side of that is you can be stable if your head coach continues to perform. A 60% winning percentage, personally to me, I think that's really impressive, considering that Zimmer's had to have a different starting quarterback basically every year of his tenure. This is kind of the first season that I think we can expect to see, 16 games out of the same quarterback that played 16 games last week. Otherwise, you've had Bradford, you've had Keenum, you've had Teddy, you've had Matt Castle. And those are the quarterbacks that started the season for him. So the fact that he's had to continuously change quarterbacks gives him a lot of latitude. That's not to say that he hasn't faced some pressure, and if the defense doesn't perform, that's more on him than anything else. And obviously, his record with offensive coordinators, Pat Shurmur, aside, he got promoted out. That deserves some question too. But I think that if this season collapses, it kind of depends on why. And if that why points to Mike Zimmer, there might be some questions. They did extend his contract, but that's only because they don't like lame duck coaches, not because they put so much faith in him that they know they're going to have him for another year. But if the season collapses, they'll figure out why that is, and that why will point to how much pressure is on Zimmer. I'll say he's going to be the coach, very likely going to be the coach heading into next year. But after that, depending on how this season goes, he'll have a fair amount of pressure put on him.
All right, one more question from me, and before I throw you to the hyenas in the chat room here, one thing Bears fans love to talk about, special teams. What is the state of the Vikings third unit as far as just break down real quick, kicking and kick return, punting, anything that the Bears should be aware of or afraid of?
Well, I think this is the first time that the Vikings fans will have a kicking game fielded by a fan base that's less neurotic than their opponents about the kicking game. It's been a while. The kicking game has much improved. Dan Bailey missed a field goal and an extra point early in a meaningless game, but it's been pretty significantly improved. The Vikings have had a lot of trouble getting that kicking game going, which is very interesting given kind of the drama surrounding Corey Vedvik, who they traded a fifth-round pick for in the offseason. They also replaced punter Matt Weil with punter Britton Colquitt, who often gets confused for his Pro Bowl punter brother, Dustin Colquitt. But he's been playing pretty lights out. And so from that perspective, they've been doing really well. And the core of their punting is not who the individual punter is, but really how good their punt gunners are. And they've done a really remarkable job of training those guys to force a bunch of fair catches and so on, which has been a weakness of Colquitt's in the past. So they're going to do a really good job in that phase. In return, Chad Beebe is the primary punt returner. He's injured. Plus, he's also muffed 2 punts. So they brought back Marcus Sherrills, a familiar face who's been one of the top punt returners in the NFL over his career. I think he's second or third in punt return yardage on average. And more importantly, he's very secure. And so he's not likely to muff punts. And kick return, I think they wish they'd have Cordero Patterson, who I still maintain is the best kick returner in NFL history. I know Bears fans have a little bit of a contention with that.
We might differ on that.
Yeah. Also, Devin Hester, best punt returner in history, should go to the Hall of Fame. I'm not going to contest that.
Hey, we like to hear that.
But having Amir Abdullah back there is an asset, but it's not remarkable, and there are some concerns about his ball security as a kick returner too. I don't think that they can rely on their kick return game like they have been able to in the past with Patterson and with Percy Harvin.
All right, Alyssa, I know you've been interacting with our Mixlr.com chat room. Any questions for Arif from our friends and any from you?
I do. I have 3 questions. Hello, Arif.
Hello.
So there is a report from KFAN Radio in the Twin Cities that Stephon Diggs has requested a trade. Is there any truth to that report? And if so, what can you share with us?
Well, so I listened to that KFAN segment, and it seems more that they were speculating that there's a possibility that he might be a person who would request a trade. I don't think any report or source reporting has indicated that he has requested a trade, and that's mostly based off of the fact that, he hasn't generated a bunch of receiving yardage and some perception about his personality. And I don't think that there's any bearing on that. I think he's actually pretty happy. The team's winning, and so he doesn't really have a bunch of ground to stand on in terms of, demanding more targets and so on. But I think people just kind of perceive Stephon Diggs to be kind of a diva. I don't think that perception is correct. And I think that they assume that if he's not getting a bunch of targets, and he's been getting a decent amount of targets, they haven't been necessarily very accurate, but he's been getting a decent amount of targets, but people just kind of assume, hey, he's not building up the yardage total that people would expect. I bet he requests a trade, but there's not really any teeth to that yet.
And we had some Kirk Cousins talk going on there in the message board. Why is Kirk Cousins' pass attempts down? Is it just because the running game is doing so well, or do you think it's because they don't trust him as a passer?
I really just think it's because they've played actually every Vikings game, the home team is raced ahead to a 21-0 lead by the second quarter, which, they're going to hope that doesn't continue because they'd like to win some away games. But every single game they've played so far. And so in those home games, they've had no reason to pass the ball. They're trying to control the clock and so on. So they've really only let him pass on third and long in those situations. And he still hasn't attempted a pass in the fourth quarter at home because they've just had such dominant leads. I don't think it's about trusting him. Obviously, against the Packers, he wasn't able to pay back their faith in him. But they did trust him to throw him out of situations, and he just couldn't execute. So I don't think it's about whether or not they trust him or whether it's really just because the game situation just did not call for them to pass the ball.
And I got one more question from you. Aldo once was a big fan of the hiring of Vikings offensive coordinator John DeFilippo, but that ended up being a big bust as he was fired mid-season. DeFilippo appears to be doing well with Jacksonville as their offensive coordinator. What happened between Zimmer and DeFilippo?
So the purported story is that DeFilippo was just not running the ball a lot, and they were the second most pass-heavy offense in the league behind the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I don't love. I think that's probably accurate. That plus a combination of the offense just underperforming. I don't love that as a reasoning because I think that you should throw the ball a lot more in the NFL in general. But he also just happened to be very poor at kind of designing plays that would be very good for that offense, even when they were throwing the ball. And so the play designs weren't actually very remarkable, and they actually put Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen in tough situations that they happened to bail themselves out of. Again, they were both 1,000-yard receivers last year. And so the offense didn't perform because of that. But I think the reason Zimmer wanted to get rid of him was, the offense wasn't performing and they weren't running the ball. And so that's probably why they let him go. But if you take a look at, if you compare PFF grades to points scored per drive, you can actually get a really good accounting for how good an offensive coordinator is. And he was near the bottom of that historically. And so that's a good indication that he was not using the players he had to the best of his ability. But, I love Gardner Minshew, so I hope he's really successful in Jacksonville.
I think we all love Gardner Minshew. Well, Arif, I want to thank you so much for your time helping us break down the Bears' next opponent, the Minnesota Vikings. Please tell our audience where they can find your work and interact with you on social media.
Sure. Well, the only social media account I have is Twitter, so at Arif Hasan NFL. My name is spelled funny, so it's ArifHasan NFL. And then all my work is posted over at theathletic.com, so you can head over there, unless you want to listen to my other podcast, in which case you can just search Norse Code or Football Machine in iTunes.
Plug it all, Arif. Whatever you got, plug it right now. Well, thank you so much once again. That awesome stuff. I think we have a better understanding of who the Bears are going up against this week. Once again, thanks, and we'll talk to you down the line. Yeah, sure. I love being on. Excellent. All right. Let's go into the second half. Alyssa.
So, John, that music signifies one thing. It is time for the second half of RB55 question.
I'm ready. I love that music.
Okay, so let's get right into it. So, both the Vikings and the Bears stand at 2-1. Both teams have lost against the Packers. The Vikings at Lambeau and the Bears at Soldier Field. Characterize just how big Sunday's game is, and is it a must-win? 55, go.
Honestly, I think it's huge. I was listening to some media pundits today saying Minnesota's back in the group of Super Bowl contenders. This is a divisional game, and a majority of people believe that the Bears are trending towards being the third best team in this division. Now is the time to start changing that narrative. You're at home. The offense looked better against the Redskins. The defense is still brutal. And if you lose this, all of a sudden, you're 0-2 in the division. You're 2-2 overall, and now you're playing catch-up. If you look at the season in a matter of quarters, this is the final game of the first quarter. And 3-1 is a hell of a lot better than 2-2. I'm not a math wizard, but one trends towards 12-4 and the other one trends towards 8-8. The Bears need to close the first quarter of the season strong, and depending on what happens with Green Bay and Philly, get themselves back into a place of power in the divisional race. So yeah, you can say this is only one game and it's only game 4, but it's more than that. This is one of those launching points for the rest of the season. I'm really hyped for this game, and maybe I'm just playing it up because I'm a super intense guy, but I'm putting a lot of stock into this game.
And it takes me back to last year. Remember that Sunday Night Football game where they beat the Vikings? And it seemed like that just kind of served as a springboard for them for the remainder of the season. So I feel like this game, even though it is a little bit earlier on, I feel like that could have the same effect.
100%.
So Raiders running back Josh Jacobs had 10 rushes for only 44 yards against Minnesota on Sunday. But the week before, the Vikings defense allowed 116 yards to Aaron Jones of the Packers on 23 carries. Is this Bears offense giving you any indication that they can get a strong, consistent run game going against the Vikings? The clock starts when you do.
Yeah, I think they can. I think we saw a team that's looking to maybe run the ball a little bit more. It's not going to be an easy task, but maybe Nagy sprinkles in a game plan that involves a little more play action. Maybe we see Mitch rolling out and a lot of misdirection could be the name of the game on Sunday afternoon. Do we see more end-arounds or fake end-arounds? Do we see an emphasis on Cordero Patterson around the edge or with Montgomery up the middle? With these players, there's always an opportunity to establish some sort of running game. It may not look like a traditional running game, and maybe we see some RPO action, or maybe Mitch tucks it and runs a few times like we saw last year. You know, as I'm speaking, I'm thinking about all the weapons this offense has, and it's pissing me off about this slow start, but it'll be fixed. I digress. But to answer the original question, yeah, there is reason to believe that the Bears can put forth a solid effort on the ground and maybe control the clock and maybe control the ball and put themselves in a position to win this. So, yeah, I think that they're going to try to establish the line of scrimmage and have a good running game.
And I think we saw in that first game against the Packers that it's essential that they establish the run early and not to put all that pressure on Trubisky.
Absolutely. I think that the running game is going to elevate Mitch just as much.
So keeping with the offense, the Bears' young receivers are having their troubles getting much going this season. Anthony Miller and Javon Wims have a total of 3 receptions for 25 yards and 0 touchdowns. It's the veterans, Allen Robinson and Taylor Gabriel, who are generating the pass offense. Between those two, they have 26 catches for 313 yards and 3 touchdowns. But now Gabriel suffered a concussion late in the Redskins game. If he misses the game against the Vikings, what becomes of the passing game? Your 55 seconds start now.
Well, I don't exactly have a definitive answer. I don't have a crystal ball, but man, I wish Anthony Miller was getting the ball a little bit more. He's a freak athlete, great hands, and a playmaker. I know there's this idea that he freelances too much and it's hard to hit him in stride because he's always going 100 miles per hour in an unpredictable direction. The same can be said for Wims as far as not getting enough balls thrown towards him. We did see the ball get spread around a little bit more against the Redskins, but I think it's extra disappointing because of the preseason expectations that we had for these two guys. We fully expected Anthony Miller to be a solid number 2 to Allen Robinson, or even develop into that 1A dynamic that we see in Minnesota or like Pittsburgh used to have with Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster. Will this be a coming out party for Anthony Miller if Gabriel's out? Maybe, but I don't know. He isn't getting many targets. And I think it was Miller who Mitch overthrew on that free play. And, Miller was, visibly irritated about that. There's no reason that this shouldn't work. I'm not sure why it isn't working, but I'm also not getting paid to figure it out. The coaching staff are the ones who's getting paid to figure it out. And honestly, I think they will. These guys are too talented to not get the ball into their hands. So I think that there is eventually going to be an answer here. At least I hope so. I'm begging the coaching staff to please figure this out. So yeah, I think that Anthony Miller maybe not his coming out party, but he should see some more action.
Anthony Miller's too talented not to get going. I feel like it's just a matter of time. It's taking a little bit longer than we would like, but we've seen what he can do in this offense, and the sooner he gets going, the sooner I feel like this offense can kind of come alive. I
want to see the ball in Anthony Miller's hands. They got to find a way to do it.
And let's make sure Mitch puts it right in his hands.
That's another thing. It's twofold.
So stopping the run appears to be instrumental to stopping the Vikings offense. They are second in the NFL in rushing yards with an average of 194 yards per game. The Bears' run defense is 5th in the league, allowing 69 yards per game. What are the keys to vanquishing the Vikings' vaunted run game? Your 55 seconds start now.
I don't think they really need to do anything different. This is the best defense in the league, and I know the Vikings are going to want to run the ball. Well, you know how some teams are saying they plan on beating the Bears by making Mitch Trubisky play quarterback? Well, hell, make Kirk Cousins play quarterback. What's so majestic about the $84 million man? I mean, he has 3 touchdowns to 2 interceptions, averaging 167 yards per game. Trubisky has 3 touchdowns to 2 interceptions, and he's averaging 193 yards per game. Now, Mitch has taken more sacks, but his completion percentage is 7 points better, and he's thrown over 40 more passes than Cousins. So, is this a conversation piece in Minnesota? I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure it is amongst the fans. So why wouldn't Minnesota try to run the ball? I have all the confidence in the world in the defense, however, to, I don't want to say stop Cook or stop the running game, but at least contain the talented backs that Minnesota has. So keep putting on the pressure, blow up the line, see if the $84 million man can beat you. And by the way, the secondary is pretty good too. So no matter what team you're talking about, I like the Bears defense in any matchup.
If you can contain that Minnesota run game, then Kirk Cousins is going to have a long day.
And that's what I hope to see. I want to see Kirk Cousins launching the ball 40 times.
So, John, I have a couple chat room questions. So what would you say is one key for the Bears offense to be productive outside of David Montgomery?
Kind of like what we were talking about, get the ball into the playmakers' hands. I'd love to see maybe some quick slants to, if Gabriel can't go, get some quick slants to either Anthony Miller, or maybe you get some quick slants to Cordero Patterson. Get the ball in the playmakers' hands in one way or another. I mean, they have all the speed in the world. Get them the ball. Now, I would like to see a couple more balls thrown down the field. I don't know how confident Nagy is calling those, but I would like to see a little bit of a vertical game. I know it sounds crazy, but I would like to see the ball get thrown down the field a little bit more. But definitely find a way to get the ball in your playmakers' hands.
Absolutely. Hopefully we get more of that. And I have one more question. There are a few injuries that the Bears are going through right now. Akeem Hicks, Bobby Massey, Taylor Gabriel, and Eddie Pinheiro. Are there any concerns on the injury front heading into this game?
I would say that I'm concerned about Hicks, not because I'm worried about the severity of it, but when your biggest strength is your defense and you have a fledgling offense, the last thing you can afford is your biggest strength to start getting chipped away with injuries. So if Hicks goes out and another person goes out and you start seeing things get phased out, then all of a sudden your biggest strength is being decimated. So I am always concerned about injuries on the defensive side of the ball, because that's where the Bears are going to make hay, and that's where the Bears are going to get their identity. And if they don't have that, then things could turn sour pretty quick.
And it feels like that depth at defensive line is really being tested.
Yeah, it is. And if that's something that's going to be tested longer and longer, if if you have depth, if your backups get hurt, you only have so much depth. So you got to hope that your biggest strength, which is the defensive side of the ball, can stay intact. That's what they were able to do last year for the most part.
So it's pep talk time. So we're going to stick with the offense again. Tariq Cohen has only 16 yards rushing on 8 carries and 82 yards receiving on 12 catches. The Gadget guy has 0 touchdowns. He needs the Buffone boost. Give him a pep talk, John, and I've turned off the clock.
All right, Tariq, my man, I'm going to keep this short and sweet, not unlike yourself, by the way. You are the most exciting player in football. I'm going to say it right now. But it's been kind of a weird start to the season for everybody, hasn't it? I know things have been slow, but when everything gets fired up, you're going to start flying high like you and the rest of the team fully expect you to do. Man, listen, you can run like the wind, you can catch, you can return punts. Hell, you could probably throw the ball if they asked you to. Patience, that's a virtue right now. For you, for this team, for the fans, for me, your time is going to come. Maybe it's this week, maybe it's next week, but because whenever you do eventually arrive this season, there's no going back. So saddle up, little buddy. You're about to take off. And with that, I'm going to give you my weekly prediction on this week's game. I think the Bears defense keeps rolling. I don't think they get 5 turnovers, but I do think they get to Cousins, maybe get an opportune interception, give some more short fields to Trubisky and the offense. I think the Bears are going to eke out a very close game. Bears defeat the Vikings 23-22. That is my prediction. I want to thank Arif Hasan again of The Athletic for being my guest tonight. Remember to follow me on Twitter at JDBuffone, to make sure you are following the Barroom on Twitter at Bears Barroom and on the Facebook page. Alyssa, tell our listeners where they can find your work and contact you on social media.
You can find my work over at bearswire.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Alyssa Barbieri. I also want to tell those listening to us live on Mixlr.com that in just a few minutes, we've got 2 more shows coming up. Fantasy Football Goon with Joe Mandel, who is also known as Joey Two Scoops, and John Santucci, a.k.a. The Tooch. They will welcome fantasy football legend Spaceball, and the 3 will get you prepped for Week 4. That's followed by Shy Fans in the Stands with Greg Braggs and Joey Two Scoops. Those 2 shows, along with this one, will be available on podcast format. So make sure you subscribe to the Bears Barroom Radio Network.
That's right, and sign up on Mixlr.com for email updates on all of our live shows. We'd love to have you in our chat room. And remember, it's absolutely free to sign up. Hope you join us live and interact. And if you listen to the podcast, leave us a review. That helps us out immensely. But that will do it for this edition of Buffone 55. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy the game, everybody. We'll see you next week.